Hello, friends. Have you ever gazed up into the night sky and wondered at the possibility of life on other planets? What marvelous beings might exist out there, hands extended in friendship, awaiting the moment when we humans take our first tentative steps into space? What tales will be told of that glorious day when we are first contacted by our brothers from beyond the stars?
In the late 1990s, Andrew Goldman and Josh Resnick left Activision to establish Pandemic Studios. The following year, Pandemic launched an Australian studio, Pandemic Brisbane. Pandemic Brisbane's earlier efforts included Army Men RTS and Dark Reign 2. With the sixth generation of consoles in full swing, Microsoft and Sony were looking for new intellectual properties for their systems, the Xbox and the PlayStation 2. Pandemic Brisbane partnered with Microsoft to make Oddballs, a party game with a unique twist. It was a turn-based party game with Crash Bandicoot-style gameplay, but where your friends controlled the things that could hurt you. A great game, but the reason why I've never heard of it is because after 10 months of development, it was cancelled. Matt Brady was a concept artist at Pandemic and worked on Oddballs. According to Brady, Grand Theft Auto 3's success made the publisher change their minds on Oddballs. They didn't want a family-friendly game, they wanted something edgy. Oddball's cancellation hurt particularly hard for Matt Harding, a designer at Pandemic. In an interview with Inverse, Harding recalls how he was driving to work when out of the blue, he came up with the idea of a game where you kill everyone. Only this time, you were an alien. The name? Destroy All Humans. We've seen a lot of alien invasions where we stop the aliens, but we've never been the aliens, and that would be fun, Harding recalls. It honestly was a sarcastic joke because I felt, here's what it sounds like you want. They said, yes, that is what we want. Pandemic Brisbane quickly bounced back from Oddballs and began working on Destroy All Humans. Sadly, Matt Harding left Pandemic during the game's pre-production due to creative burnout. In fact, he left the gaming industry altogether. Really, are you flying over a city in a UFO blowing up all the buildings? Where's the game in that? We want it to be like Grand Theft Auto on the ground as an alien, but why? If you got a spaceship, why would you ever get out? There were questions like that I didn't want to solve. Despite his departure, Matt Harding receives a creator credit in the final game.
For Farmer Joe and his wife, this was a night like any other, blissfully unaware of the threat that was about to be cast upon them and all of humanity. Watch as...
Production moved swiftly as the team began brainstorming ideas for Destroy All Humans. At its core, the game was about Cryptosporidium, who comes from a race of aliens known as the Furons. His mission is to collect Furon DNA from human brainstems because his race is on the brink of extinction. The team decided to set the game during the 1950s, the era of the Red Scare, and more importantly, the golden age of science fiction. This gave them the opportunity to poke fun at the decade and the tropes of 50s sci-fi. Pandemic Brisbane then set off designing the game and finding ways to destroy all humans.
Caffeinated beverages are bad for you.
This is a sunny suburban Santa Modesta, so you're actually seeing something that sort of survived to the final version of the game, although it's quite a different layout to it.
This is also while we're in our make everything as huge as possible mindset.
Yes, and there's the cloak on.
During development, many ideas were considered. Originally, the game was more UFO-centric. You would go around destroying buildings and abducting humans to feed the crypto space beast. Once big enough, the space beast could be released to wreak havoc. Matt Brady and the art team devised numerous creature concepts, including the fractal ogre and other assorted monsters. The space beast didn't make the cut. The ability to grow and launch Space Beast onto an unsuspecting human populace was the idea that hurt the most to lose because everyone loved the idea. When the programmers decided no to Space Beast, it was like someone took our pets away. Space Beast almost broke the team. Everyone was so excited and went off on their own, imagining these gigantic creatures being beamed down and blasting through the cities. Fortunately, unfortunately, we were quickly brought back to reality by the programming team. Many hearts were broken. What we could have, given the hardware limitations, was not even a pale shadow of what we wanted and dreamed up. To the point where it was better to not have it at all rather than try to plug some impotent, inferior version of what we had in mind, which would simply ruin the team's spirit. Many weapons and abilities evolved over the course of development. Hypnotize was originally a gun called the Hypno Beam. The Sonic Boom was a rapid-fire machine gun, and before the Anal Probe, there was the Brain Bug. We made the mechanic, started designing levels around it, but eventually discarded it because it did not seem very crypto. He was not someone who needed to snipe people from far away. That would imply he was afraid of the puny humans. So, despite the mechanic being cool and some good mission design going into it, we let it go because it did not fit the style of the game. The evolution of the Furons, particularly Crypto, is an interesting story. Early on, the team struggled nailing his look. The artist drew various concepts, most of which were, ironically, too alien. That is, until Matt Brady hit upon Crypto's iconic design. I struggled a bit with nailing the look, and so I drew a gray alien in a bad attitude posture as a joke, if only to see how far I should push the concept and in what direction. This turned out to be exactly what we were looking for, and became our main character. Interestingly, Matt Brady pitched what could be best called Squid Crypto. The idea was if Crypto's health was low, he would eject from his spacesuit to reveal he was a squid-like creature. The player would have to guide Squid Crypto back to his saucer to get a new suit. Despite Brady's enthusiasm, no one else on the team got behind the idea. Lachlan Cree, our 3D animator, once drew an alien with an extended jawline and tentacles as part of his suit. This was very exciting to me, to be able to see Crypto in some horrific true alien form, and I made sure to include it in my storyboards. Since the game designers never got behind this idea, it never went anywhere, which felt like a missed opportunity. The Space Beast and Squid Crypto were one of several ideas brainstormed during development. Other ideas considered but nixed include aerial enemies for the saucer to fight, X-ray vision which will let Crypto determine who's human and who is alien, a spider-like backpack that let Crypto crawl up buildings, a much more dynamic destruction system where buildings crumble differently depending on where you hit them. And finally, ludicrous speed.
Majestic lesson number 1. Strange occurrences reported. Patrol is ordered to keep an eye out for suspicious activity.
One thing Cut reintroduced in Destroy All Humans 2 was the Blisk. In an earlier draft of the story, it would have been revealed they were on Earth and secretly operating Majestic, the government agency who hunts Crypto throughout the game. Later rewrites scrapped the Blisk, but they returned for the sequel. As Brady summarized, lots of ideas, but limited due to time and budget.
Vertical takeoff and landing! How do you like that, Michael?
That's it? That's your ultimate weapon?
Patterson! Get over there!
While development was smooth, there were a few bumps. At the time, Pandemic had management problems. It reached a point where the higher-ups from the Los Angeles headquarters had to intervene. Not long after I left, the bigwigs from Pandemic's head office in Los Angeles personally visited the studio in Brisbane, and at the end of the day, the problem manager suddenly resigned and was never heard of again. I kind of wish I was there for that. Derek Proud, project manager on both Destroy All Humans and its sequel, says the team pulled long hours making the first game. Derek himself was juggling managing Destroy All Humans and at least 3 other projects around that time. Destroy All Humans publisher, THQ, was largely hands-off during development, occasionally providing suggestions for what the team could do. I think they were supportive, but there was an element we were flying under the radar. We were a cheap project comparatively because the Australian dollar was so low at the time compared to the US dollar that THQ got excellent value for their money. They also trusted Pandemic as they had made Full Spectrum Warrior, so they were a little more hands-off than they would have been under other circumstances.
Every one of the dang cows, then it looked like it stuck some sort of device up the poor thing's...
Clap, trap, and after all that, I didn't even get to see Miss Rockwell. She just walked right on by with her...
Crops laid out flat in circles like a 4th of July pinwheel. I told Edgar, there goes our savings, no new shoes for the twins, And I guess Darlene's just gonna have to live another year with that overbite.
Development on Destroy All Humans began in late 2002. 2 years later, the game made its public debut at E3 2004. At this point, the story had been figured out, but the dialogue hadn't. With the game's E3 premiere looming, the team needed someone who could deliver on the comedy. Enter Tom Abernethy. Tom Abernethy was an aspiring writer trying to pursue writing video games. His earliest jobs in the industry included writing the manual for Dark Reign 2 and working as a tester on Minority Report Everybody Runs. One of his friends worked at Pandemic and told him about Destroy All Humans. My friend called me and said, "Listen, there's this game we're doing an E3 demo for, and the team that's making the game has written some stuff that's supposed to be funny, but it isn't. And the president is looking for someone who knows how to write. They asked if I could write a page and a half of spec dialogue, and I said yes." Abernethy was tasked with writing a page and a half of thoughts Crypto sees when he reads minds. Abernethy hit upon the joke that underneath the bubbly exterior of the 50s, everyone is secretly depraved.
Yeah, town's doing great, business is booming, hope is on the way, yada
That's
yada
right,
yada.
big man.
Let's
No
barrel
scat.
through this puppy so I can get down to the real business of governing. Making time with the delicious Miss Rockwell.
The thoughts weren't just a way to make a quick gag. It was to say people are driven by their appetites in some way even if it doesn't look like it. I had a ton of fun doing it and knew I was doing it well. The humor was funny on many levels, so if you didn't understand a joke, you at least got a laugh from causing destruction. Tom was allowed to sit in on the recording sessions and give guidance to the game's VO director, Doug Kerrigan, who would then take Tom's advice and pass it on to the actors. Tom's input helped them figure out Crypto and Pox's relationship, and more importantly, find Crypto's voice. Initially, the Furons were British. Crypto himself had a Cockney-like voice you can hear in some early footage.
You think you can destroy us so easily? You humans are pathetic. We will control your government and destroy all humans.
According to Tom, Crypto and Pox's relationship was more in line with Kang and Kodos from The Simpsons, something he nor the people at Pandemic's LA headquarters agreed with. Eventually, Tom hit upon the idea of making Crypto and Pox's relationship more contentious, more akin to M and Bond than Statler and Waldorf. Though he had figured out Crypto's personality, he hadn't figured out his voice, something Grant Albrecht, Crypto's VO, was able to help with. Crypto is the American id unchained. He's a rugged individualist in the way Bond is. He's a lone wolf who pays no attention to what orders he's given and does what he wants to do. I found that in Crypto early on. I brought an Americanness to him, and what I found is after he lands on Earth, he kind of likes it. I knew that, but I didn't know the voice. Grant is in the booth, and we started playing with voices. We started with the classic American action leading type. The short list included Clint Eastwood, Charles Bronson, Charlton Heston, and Jack Nicholson. The Jack Nicholson immediately intrigued me. One, because Grant does a good impression, but also because it recalled Nicholson from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He's a guy who could go off at any minute, you never know when he's going to flip out on you. The voice worked, but it wasn't quite right. We needed something for one of the other guys to lock it in. At some point, I asked Grant, what if he tried doing 2/3 Nicholson and 1/3 Charlton Heston? He opened his mouth and I nearly jumped out of my seat. People recognized the Nicholson, but I thought it was important to have the 1/3 Heston because it wasn't right without it. I love the performance and I think the Charlton Heston aspect doesn't get enough credit as it should. Destroy All Humans was praised not only for its premise, but also its writing and voice acting. Its biting satire of the 1950s is one of the reasons why people remember the game. Another reason why Destroy All Humans is fondly remembered is its stellar soundtrack, composed by Gary Scheitman. In keeping with the 1950s motif, Developer Pandemic and publisher THQ won a score heavily inspired by the music of Bernard Herrmann. Gary Scheinman, who had previously composed Voyeur for the CDI, learned about Destroy All Humans through someone who worked at THQ. They forwarded it to the people at Pandemic Studios, the developer. They heard it, they liked what they heard, and when they heard that I put together a more extensive demo, they would then audition composers and ask me to audition. I declined because I thought, if you like what's on my demo, that's the perfect way to judge me. I think I was the only composer who didn't audition, and I got the project. Nobody else nailed that style. In the same interview, Scheinman says he drew a lot of inspiration from Bernard Herrmann, specifically his work on The Day the Earth Stood Still, and he crafted music based on the levels, what the player was doing, etc. Additionally, a soundtrack was put together featuring remixed 50s music from artists like Junkie XL. Only one of the songs, a remix of Shaboom, was used in the game itself.
Rated T for Teen. We interrupt this broadcast for a special news bulletin. Aliens have invaded Earth and begun a massive assault. There are huge explosions everywhere. Entire city blocks are burning. They have come here to destroy all humans.
Destroy All Humans was released on June 21st, 2005 for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Critics praised the game for its humor, premise, and setting, but criticized certain design choices and its short length. The game was a commercial success, selling more than 1 million copies by 2006. For those who worked on it, they're proud of how the game turned out. Tom Abernathy cites 2 reasons how he knew they had succeeded. The first was the New York Times ran an article analyzing the game's writing. The second was when he received a call from an old friend from high school who told him, "The funniest thing happened. I got this game from my stepson called Destroy All Humans and we've been playing it, and this stuff reminds me of my friend Tommy. It sounds just like his sense of humor. How weird is that?" Derek Proud remembers, "I remember talking to a movie guy in LA about the game and just listing off all the things we made fun of. Alien abduction, anal probing, cattle mutilation, commies under the bed, Men in Black, all that stuff. He was so blown away that we could do all that in a game and for it to still be fun." The original Destroy All Humans is a classic. The concept is inventive, the characters are memorable, the soundtrack is excellent, and it revels in the mayhem. While some aspects of the gameplay haven't aged well, the core idea of causing mass chaos as an alien holds up. Where Destroy All Humans truly shines is the writing. As a kid, I laughed at the anal probing and cow abuse. As an adult, I laugh at the jokes that poke fun of how overly paranoid people were in the 1950s. Everything the player does is perceived as the work of communists. Crypto himself is constantly called a communist or a little green man, much to his annoyance. Speaking of which, Crypto is a standout character. I love his ticked off persona, the fact he views humans as insignificant, and his voice, that gravely Nicholson Heston voice. Like I said, some aspects of the game have aged poorly. The holobob system is neat, but needing to maintain your disguise while making sure the concentrator meter doesn't run empty is tedious. Additionally, there are abrupt stopgaps where the player must collect DNA before the story continues. It grinds the game to a halt and is unnecessary filler. Despite this, I love Destroy All Humans. It left an impression on my puny mind and has since become one of my favorite games of all time. Since Destroy All Humans was so successful, a sequel seemed obvious. With Destroy All Humans 2, Pandemic raised the stakes. Destroy All Humans won gamers over with its clever spin on the alien invasion genre. Publisher THQ was so confident about Destroy All Humans they decided to greenlight a sequel during the first game's production. According to Tom Abernathy, the idea for Destroy All Humans 2 came from a discussion him and a designer had. The designer was figuring out whether to stay in the 50s or go to the 60s. I told him we shouldn't do the same thing over again, so let's do the 60s. Then he replied, "Yeah, let's make him James Bond." And I told him, "Dude, that's awesome. Crypto is Bond in the 60s. I could really sink my teeth into that."
We focused the first one in the 1950s and played up all that great alien mythology of the 50s. And now with the sequel, we've moved into the 60s.
You know, 1960s kind of has its own resonance in popular culture today. And there's so many kind of...
Development time on Destroy All Humans 2 was shorter, taking 18 months compared to the first game's 3-year development. But since Pandemic was very familiar with what they could and couldn't do, this allowed development to move smoothly and more efficiently. The team worked much smoother, the game identity was well developed, so it was much easier to follow the line of humor and visual style we were after. Our relationship with THQ was easier to maintain, as they were more confident in us, and the first game's success allowed us to have more freedom with the subject. There were rumors that the first Destroy All Humans had more arguments, but by the time I joined Destroy All Humans 2, it was a real clubhouse mentality. We did a lot more overtime than we should have, but everyone got along, and we were having a good time. I still work with people from Pandemic to this day, so when you find people you like to work with, keep track of them. Kiera Lord worked as a junior programmer on Destroy All Humans 2. Development was collaborative, and there were many instances where different parts of the team had creative input on certain gameplay aspects. Kiera herself saved a new saucer weapon, the anti-gravity field, from being cut after she prototyped a black hole bomb idea. Havoc was a non-stop source of comedy. I used to keep a folder of clips and screenshots of the weirdest things I could find that happened. The most drastic one was due to how we stripped the collision on roadside curbs. Characters' feet colliders and ragdoll mode would be small enough to fit under that. Normally, that wouldn't be a big problem, but the type of collision we used for the ground enforced a "you can't be under this" rule, so as soon as a foot slipped under the curb, Havoc would misread it as a penetrating object and apply enough upward foot so that in the next frame it would be above ground. In short, a character would fall over near the side of the road, bump the curb with their foot, and suddenly be shot off into space.
Aha! Yeah, this doohickey ought to work, as long as it doesn't fall off. Now for the, what the hell is this? They call this a particle burst accelerator? The sensor cell connects to the focal plane connects to the plasma beam.
As far as cut content goes, there wasn't as much cut when compared to the first Destroy All Humans. Initially, the ninjas could pose as environmental objects, but this confused testers because they thought the ninjas had turned into the object, not the other way around. There was a lot more licensed music in earlier builds, but due to licensing issues, they were removed. We were trying to cram more embarrassed stuff onto the same hardware that was running the first game. We were still having to let go of many things we wanted to squeeze in due to the shorter development time.
My patience is at an end, Gospodin.
I'm shaking in my booties. You guys make Americans look clever.
Silence! The workers' revolution is inevitable.
Right.
With the new decade, new locations, and new characters, Tom Abernathy found himself with a lot more to contend with. Unlike the first game, Abernathy had more input on the story, allowing him to flesh out the world in ways he couldn't with the first game. This allowed him to brainstorm ways to merge real history with fictional history. The guys from Pandemic Australia came to me with a bare-bones plot outline up to getting into Tunguska. They knew the enemy was a new alien race called the Blisk. I'd known about the Tunguska Blast of 1908 since 2nd grade. I had a book that had strange but true stories. One of the things the book talked about was the Tunguska Blast of 1908, where there was a massive explosion in Siberia and no one knew what caused it. I started to think about the Blisk, the Tunguska Blast, and the sketchy origin story we had laid out in the first game. In developing the sequel, I thought, what if the 1908 blast was actually the crash landing of a Blisk ship? And I concluded, what if the history of the Soviet Union is the history of Blisk on Earth? And I sat here thinking, holy crap, that's the coolest idea I've ever thought up.
Among us, You're not suggesting.
Suggesting? I'm telling you. Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev.
Trotsky?
Please, don't be ridiculous.
Tom was also proud of how he wrote Natalia, the ex-KGB agent Crypto falls in love with. He said it felt gratifying to create a solid female foil for Crypto, and Courtney Taylor, Natalia's actress, killed it, as she understood the character and could do a plausible Russian accent. The only thing Tom and Pandemic Brisbane disagreed on was the studio's take on hippies. The team was so determined to get out of America that he was unable to dissuade them from moving it to later in the game. Plus, he didn't like how the team viewed hippies as being nothing but dirty and miserable, and tried soft-pedaling those jokes as much as possible. They wanted to parody America, but it was an America most of them had never been to. Much of the second game takes place in other locations like London, and they knew more about that culture than I did. Conversely, our ideas of the 60s didn't match up. Their ideas were centered around mods and rockers, early to mid-60s stuff, whereas in America, how we define the 60s didn't come until 1967 and 1968. In addition to writing, Tom found himself behind the mic, voicing a minor character called the Freak. The reason why is because they forgot to cast someone for the part, so at the last minute, Tom stepped in.
You seem to know an awful lot for a deadbeat, hippie. What's your secret?
I can read minds.
Is that right?
Nah, I'm messing with you, man. I pick up radio transmissions with my teeth.
Helping Tom admirably out with the writing was Leanne Taylor. Leanne joined the project after attending a writers' festival in Brisbane, where she met Gordon Moyes, producer of the first two games. Moyes mentioned they were looking for another writer, so she sent in her resume and got the job. While Tom did most of the heavy lifting, Leanne wrote some of the side quests and in-game thoughts. Humor is highly subjective, but what I enjoy most in comedy is the unexpected. When I'm able to surprise someone into laughing, I know I've done a good job. I also enjoy comedy that shows life from a different angle, sometimes absurd, sometimes poignant, but always in a way that expands our understanding of the world and our place in it. Everything I wrote went through Tom, and he gave me first eyes on everything he wrote, even if I didn't have feedback to give. Tom is an excellent mentor. I wouldn't be where I am without his patience and kindness.
In the 60s, the US was afraid of communism. Russia was afraid of democracy. Tokyo was afraid of giant lizards.
Destroy All Humans 2 released on October 17, 2006. Reviews for the second game were positive. Critics praised the sequel for improving the first game's faults, its new features, and the game's biting sense of humor. Sales-wise, the sequel sold as well as the original, but not better. Destroy All Humans 2 is a fantastic sequel. The gameplay is better, the jokes are funnier, and it's a satisfying sequel in every way possible. I like how the game develops Crypto as a character. In the first game, he's a ticked-off alien who cares nothing about humans. However, the start of the second game shows he's adjusted to our lifestyle, probably because this Crypto clone has a package, giving him a new lease on life. The story starts in one place, then goes in an unexpected, interesting direction. I like the Blisk and how they tie back to the first game's backstory. I love Natalia and how she deflects Crypto's advances, but at the end, the two fall for each other. Gameplay-wise, it eschews the mishmash of linear and sandbox elements in favor of being a full-fledged open-world game. There's a lot to do in Destroy All Humans 2, from ruining lives to finding collectibles, to an entire side story where Crypto starts a cult worshipping Arkvoodle, god of the Furons. The only issue I have is the mini protection escort missions. The game may be called Destroy All Humans 2, but several quests involve protecting someone or something. Nothing says fun like protecting tents for almost 10 minutes. Otherwise, it's an excellent game. For those who worked on the original Destroy All Humans games, it was a fun and exciting opportunity. It was during a time when anything was possible in the gaming industry, and developers could come up with the wildest ideas and make a quality game. Although these people have moved on to bigger and better things, for them, working on Destroy All Humans remains a highlight in their careers. The initial appeal of Destroy All Humans is the strength of its simplicity. Just like the movie Snakes on a Plane, Destroy All Humans has everything you need to know in the title alone, but really, it's because you get to play as the bad guy. An overpowered bad guy at that. Honestly, I don't know. I didn't even realize it had much of a following till now. I suspect it was very different from the rest of the stuff that came out at the time. We certainly were allowed to be far more unhinged than other games coming out at the time, though I never expected that someone would go through the effort to untangle the THQ IP bundles into a remake. Really glad they did, but still, wow. In 2007, Pandemic Studios was bought by Electronic Arts. The developer's acquisition then stopped THQ from figuring out how they would continue the now popular Destroy All Humans. Unfortunately, their decisions had unintended repercussions for both the franchise and the studios who would continue the series. After Pandemic released Destroy All Humans 2, many assumed they would make Destroy All Humans 3, but they didn't. For years, we didn't know why, but according to Tom Abernathy, the studio had no plans for a third game, and when THQ made an offer, they refused. THQ came back to us and asked us to do Destroy All Humans 3, even though Pandemic had a contract for the first two. Plus, they were only willing to give us $15 million to do it, and they wanted it done in 9 months. The top guys at Pandemic said, "We don't feel we can hit the quality bar we have hit with our other titles and even the first 2 games. We gladly do it with the proper time and resources, but that's too bare bones." With Pandemic out, THQ turned to its internal studios. Somewhere along the way, the publisher decided they wanted 2 Destroy All Humans games, one that was a spin-off and another that was Destroy All Humans 3. For the spin-off, they turned to Locomotive Games. In 1984, Don Traeger joined Electronic Arts and produced an assortment of games, including Skate or Die. In 1991, he co-founded EA Sports and through this company managed to sign deals with famous sports stars like Michael Jordan and organizations like the PGA. Traeger left EA Sports in 1995 to establish Don Traeger Productions, which was acquired by THQ and renamed Pacific Coast Power and Light. The studio made various games, including Jet Mode 3 for the PlayStation and WWE Crush Hour for the PS2 and GameCube. They renamed themselves Locomotive Games in the mid-2000s and would develop PSP ports of Cars and Ratatouille. In 2006, the team began prototyping a PSP Destroy All Humans game. The Wii's release later that year spurred THQ to ask Locomotive if they could make a Wii exclusive Destroy All Humans. It was around this time a man named Ken Allen joined Locomotive Games. I was at Atari and had been there for 5 to 6 years. Atari was going through some financial difficulties, and I was one of the casualties. I interviewed with Don Traeger, who was one of the heads of Locomotive at the time, and the conclusion was my experience running an internal team was not up to par, but running an external team was more in line for me. Fortunately, Don decided to hire me and train me on how to run an internal team. I relocated to California and started work on my first project, which was Big Willy Unleashed.
Wait, you fool! You can't simply go waltzing about without learning which buttons activate your various powers and weapons.
Come on, Pox. Do we gotta do this every time? I've been destroying humans for 20 years now. I know how it works.
So you...
Initially, the game was slated to be co-developed by both Locomotive Games and Pandemic Studios. The idea was Locomotive Games would do the Wii version, while Pandemic would produce a PS2 version. I thought Pandemic was great and was really looking forward to the collaboration. We had several conference calls, and we had a great development relationship building up. I don't know what happened between THQ and Pandemic, but the deal fell through. I was disappointed to be losing Pandemic as a development partner and thought this was a significant blow. Despite Pandemic's absence, the team pushed on with making the Wii version, now called Big Willy Unleashed. While Don Traeger acted as the project manager, Ken Allen was the senior producer, supervising various aspects like the art, voice recordings, and ensuring the game was packaged and ready to go. One of the biggest challenges Locomotive faced was figuring out how an action game like Destroy All Humans would look and play on the Wii. The Wii hardware was tough to work with and get enough of the world in it and run it all at a decent speed. The controllers add an extra layer of complication. This was one of our first Wii projects, so we were learning a lot about the hardware and controllers. I think a year or so later, we would have had a much better handle on its capabilities and could have made a better game. About 3 weeks were spent designing and testing the controls before a final layout was agreed upon. We knew what the Wii controller could do and tested its limits. We wrote a program which showed us how much of the player's actions could be detected with motion, and in turn we devised a weapon roster and control scheme around it. We tested how far the controller could be tilted before it stopped sending us information, as well as how quickly we could press buttons, which was never a problem. At the end, we decided to focus on getting the motions and aiming down the one controller instead of having to use two. The most unique aspect of Big Willy Unleashed is the introduction of a new vehicle, a 50-foot tall mech that's also the mascot for the Big Willy's franchise. According to Don, the idea came to him during a brainstorm session. He noticed the Bob's Big Boy-like restaurant in one of the concept drawings and thought it would be amusing if the statue was a mech the aliens could control. Don says the similarities between the Big Boy and Big Willy's led to a minor legal dispute where THQ had to pay the Big Boy owners a usage fee for the character.
Fortuitous stroke. Everything has come together. My robot, the professor, his brain transfer device, and the brain.
Crypto! I was a fool!
THQ wanted Big Willy Unleashed out by Christmas 2007, though the game wasn't released till early 2008. Because of the strict deadline, the team had to take the work they had done on the initial PSP version and convert it to the Wii's hardware, which led to a lot of technical compromises, like no lip sync. My biggest problem with the game was that we were not able to have enough time to do lip sync. The game has a lot of cutscenes, and the camera is always behind the person who is speaking. I was pushing this from the beginning and always got pushed back. I may have been inexperienced with game development, but I knew with cutscenes you had to feature the person speaking with actual lip sync. According to Ken, the team lacked structure, so the game didn't have a clear vision. Not helping matters was the infighting amongst key members like Don, the art director, and one of the designers. For Don, he felt the game needed at least 6 more months development time to work things out. That, and the fact the partnership with Pandemic fell through, compromised their plans. Despite these circumstances, Locomotive Games pushed forward to finish the game.
Listen, before we go on, I gotta lay down some ground rules. I don't want to hear any more gab about the size of your Big Willy, or the smell of your Big Willy, and the rest of that jazz. Get me? I had enough of your ding-dong in Harbor City to last a lifetime.
Hired to write the game was Micah Wright and Jay Linder, a writing duo whose background was mainly in television, working on shows like SpongeBob SquarePants and Angry Beavers. They also wrote Path of the Furon. We'll talk more about their writing style in that part of the video. For Big Willy Unleashed, the duo didn't have as much involvement as they did on Path of the Furon. Recalling his work on the project, co-writer Jay Linder said, "We took on Patty Hearst, Abscam, and Vietnam. The idea that a Colonel Sanders lookalike could get cheap meat from the bodies of the Vietnam War to sell out of his restaurants is probably the darkest idea in the series, and it's on the Wii." Those who worked at Locomotive Games didn't mind the game's cheesy, lowbrow humor, and felt it was fitting for something like Destroy All Humans. The only one who didn't was Ken Allen, who felt the humor was a bit too niche and required too much knowledge of the 70s to understand the jokes.
I've programmed the navigational computer for a special tactic.
What? A flying saucer serving up pain and destruction doesn't strike enough fear into the average human?
Normally, yes. But we need to try something a little more covert.
Whoa! And me without my Dramamine!
Crypto!
Unlike the other games, Big Willy Unleashed does not feature Grant Albrecht and Richard Horvitz as Crypto and Pox. According to Ken, they approached the original actors, but they asked for percentages, something the SAG had not negotiated when it came to video games. Locomotive Games offered a flat fee plus a bonus, but they declined. However, in the MySpace post written by Pox's voice actor Richard Horvitz, he paints a different picture of the story. Special thanks to the Discord user Destroy All Humans fan for sharing this. A lot of you have been asking me, what's the deal with Destroy All Humans? I would like to set the record straight. Grant Albrecht and I will be in Destroy All Humans 3. We began recording the game earlier this year, and all the facts, including gaming platforms the game would be released on, were made known to us. At the same time this game was being negotiated, THQ decided to make another game called Destroy All Humans Big Willy Unleashed, or something to that effect. Grant and I were told it was a small game and that would only be released on PSP and Wii platforms. Based on that information, we agreed to a certain amount of money. We then later found out that we had been lied to, for us to agree to a lesser amount than we would have negotiated for had we known the additional platforms the game was going to be released on. Based on that knowledge, Grant and I felt taken advantage of and could not agree to the terms of the agreed upon. We did continue to finish Destroy All Humans 3 since all information on that project was above board. THQ did not care to negotiate at all on Big Willy and instead chose to replace Grant and me. I assure you that the new voices will not be anywhere as good or as funny as the characters Grant and I created. THQ will not tell you that it's not our voices because they wouldn't want to hurt their profits. I am issuing this statement because I want my fans and friends to know the truth before they spend their $50 on Big Willy Unleashed. I hope this clears things up. Voicing Crypto and Pox were Sean Donnellan and Daryl Carrillo, the latter of which is better known for voicing Kiryu in the Yakuza games.
Come on, come on!
Hello.
Hello, this is Crypto Spiridium 13.
You have reached the helpline for Furotech Industries. We at Furotech Industries value your call and are eager to help you. Please press *.
In various preview articles and promotional material, Big Willy Unleashed was slated for the Wii, PSP, and PS2. The reality was far from the truth. The PSP version was cancelled not long after development switched to the Wii. As for the PS2 version, it was outsourced to a startup studio in Seattle after the initial pandemic locomotive partnership never materialized. According to Don, the builds he saw during development were less than stellar. Ultimately, the PS2 version was scrapped.
Open world gameplay exclusive on the Wii.
Wii! Wii! No matter how many times that word rolls off my tongue, it just tingles goodness.
Okay. Now, where I come from, open world means you can travel from one end of the galaxy to another.
Destroy All Humans Big Willy Unleashed released on February 25, 2008 to mixed reviews. Critics appreciated Locomotive's efforts to bring the series to the Wii, but felt the game was lacking. It's unclear how well the game did sales-wise, but it likely didn't sell nowhere near as well as the first two. Despite the game's tepid response from both critics and fans, I think Big Willy Unleashed did some things right. For starters, the controls are good. Aiming feels smooth and gestures are kept to a minimum. I think Locomotive Games did a stellar job translating the core Destroy All Humans gameplay to the Wii. It still plays like Destroy All Humans, and the new Big Willy mech is fun to mess around with. It's not every day you get to level a city using a mech armed with laser eyes and nuclear farts. As much as I hate saying this, I like the corny Big Willy puns. Yes, these double entendres are shameful and obvious, but the 12-year-old in me giggles anytime I hear Pox say something about his Big Willy. However, the rest of the game is mediocre. The missions are basic, with very few standouts, and the graphics are ugly. If this had been on the PSP, it would have looked alright, but on Wii, it's inexcusable, especially the lack of lip syncing. Big Willy Unleashed has its moments, but it's also a reminder that playing with your Big Willy only gets you so far. After Big Willy Unleashed, Locomotive Games began working on various Wii projects, including Stuntman Demolition, a story-focused entry in the Stuntman series. Another project was Red Faction Beast, a Wii-exclusive Red Faction title that would have incorporated Volition's Geomod physics. Unfortunately, neither project got far because Locomotive Games was shut down by THQ in April 2008. Don Traeger went on to establish Metagame Media, while Ken Allen worked at various studios before ending up at his current job, the New York Times. Looking back on Big Willy Unleashed, Ken had this to say: "As far as lessons learned, I think you and I agree that almost no one who plays games will remember a game shipping on time, but instead the memories about the experience. I know THQ really wanted this game shipped by Christmas, and most companies now are aware of the pitfalls of that, putting effort into a short-term game and trying to risk a long-term loss. Companies need to resist shipping a game on time and sacrifice quality. I've seen a lot of companies do that, and they've destroyed players' faith in the franchise and tainted the studio's reputation. You look at the games which remain classics, and they didn't worry about a shipping date. They focused on making a quality product. When studios have the bandwidth and finances to work on a game till it's fully polished, you have a guaranteed success."
No, my banker was in the region. Something about shrimp boats and a local mentally challenged war veteran. He dropped off the proceeds.
Beauty. Listen, from now on, leave the business to me. I've got a great idea for all this cash, and it involves a little town I know out Nevada way. I'm telling you, Poxy, the babes they've got out there are scrumptious, and everything, I mean everything, is totally legal.
After Pandemic opted to not make Destroy All Humans 3, THQ turned to its internal studios. In deciding who would make the next official entry, the company found a pair of Cranky Pants.
Cranky Pants Games.
Cranky Pants Games was a small studio in Seattle whose only credentials were GameCube ports of Summoner and Red Faction 2. In 2005, they released Evil Dead Regeneration, a hack and slash based on the horror franchise. Reviews were mixed, but critics appreciate how the game recreated the irreverent tone of the films. After making Evil Dead, the studio was slated to make a game based on The Sopranos or Rome. Instead, they were put in charge of Destroy All Humans 3, or as it would later be called, Destroy All Humans: Path of the Furon. Overseeing the project was John Knowles, a former LucasArts developer who joined Cranky Pants during Evil Dead's production. After getting the green light to make Destroy All Humans 3, the team began brainstorming. Ideas they considered included skipping the 70s and setting it in the 80s, as well as rebooting the series for next gen. The team decided to set the game in the 70s and lampoon kung fu movies. For those who don't know, there was a martial arts explosion during the 70s because of the legendary Bruce Lee. This led to an influx of martial arts flicks at the drive-ins and grindhouse theaters. According to Knowles, not everyone was on board with the idea, with some worried it would come off as a tad racist. THQ wanted the game out on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 and gave them only 18 months to make the game. More importantly, the publisher didn't allow them to get in touch with Pandemic. Because we weren't able to contact Pandemic, it meant we couldn't ask for access to their coding or receive help from their designers or writers.
Get ready to meet your cloner.
We've added some new power and strengths to the old weapons and certainly brought back some of the favorites. Disintegrator Ray.
John Knowles wanted Path of the Furon to be the ultimate Destroy All Humans experience. The game would feature aerial combat, hi-fi destruction, and crazy new weapons not possible on older hardware. According to Chris Owe, senior gameplay engineer on Path of the Furon, the team played through the first two games during pre-production to see what Pandemic did well and what Cranky Pants could improve on. The games were great, but we felt the UFO was severely underutilized, so we punched ours up with way more abilities. The UFO in the first game had limited death ray, and I remember John waving his arms and explaining to me how you should be able to paint your name on the side of a building with the death ray, and you should be able to slice light poles and trees in half with it. He was equally animated as he demonstrated how the Seeker missile should fly all over the place, punching holes through buildings and hunting down the target. We were working on some cool damage shaders so we could damage and destroy buildings throughout the city, including different damage types. Initially, Cranky Pants wanted to do away with Crypto's old guns and give him a brand new arsenal. The team devised many ideas, including the Supersizer, which inflated humans into a balloon, the Colossomorpher, which made humans grow to 50 feet tall and proceed to go on a rampage, and Spider Bots, which would latch on to people and suck out their brains. They considered giving the Saucer a giant saw blade to cut through buildings, or a pair of headphones that could destroy buildings with an all-out disco assault. Unfortunately, THQ mandated they keep the original weapons, which meant they had to find ways to revamp the old guns and come up with a handful of new ones. This was the first of many challenges Cranky Pants faced. The other one was quite unreal.
What I want is a game where I can go anywhere and do anything at any time with over-the-top, hyper-realistic explosions, all in real-time dynamic physical simulation running at a liquid-fast frame rate.
To create Path of the Furon's next-gen destruction, the team used Unreal Engine 3, a graphics engine great for games like Gears of War, but a hassle to try and make an open-world game with. I've used Unreal Engine 4 recently and it's light years better than Unreal 3 was. We could have made an amazing game with that tech. Unreal Engine 3 was in the middle of Gears of War and everything was geared for that game and that type of gameplay, so it made it tough to make a more epic scale ground and air sandbox game that ran well. The code was often literally Gears of War code throughout the engine, and they weren't prioritizing open world gameplay. Lots of concessions had to be made and things were scaled back. Sadly, some cool features were gutted at the last minute to make the game shippable. I remember there were tons of bugs with physics, players getting stuck in the ground, performance issues, etc. Unreal Engine 3 did have benefits, but like I said, it was more for a Gears of War game than a third-party middleware engine. Despite these hurdles, spirits were high at Cranky Pants Games, now renamed Sandblast, and the team found ways to have fun. Chris Owe had a yellow wiffle bat he smacked people with. One day at work, an employee suddenly jumped on his desk and began cursing everybody. Another wore an electric dog collar that shocked him if he got too close to his monitor.
Lights, the sounds, we thought really complemented Crypto.
In the process of development, a lot of ideas were pitched, but scrapped or pared down. John Knowles wanted large-scale boss fights that took advantage of the next-gen hardware. However, time and resources meant they weren't as epic as envisioned. You might recall the Hong Kong level ends with a fight against a giant dragon. In the final game, it takes place on a floating island and all you do is dodge the dragon's attacks and shoot it when it's vulnerable. The dragon is a stationary target and barely moves. The initial idea was quite different. Initially, the dragon boss battle was supposed to take place inside a warehouse. Once I prototyped the battle, the warehouse didn't fit the combat design. Everyone agreed next-gen bosses should be larger and more animated than those of years past. In the process of defining the look, I wanted to test out another gameplay idea. In order to integrate jetpack gameplay and add a heightened sense of drama, I created a ring structure where the bridges in between platforms would be destroyed by the dragon during the battle. The rocks would then collapse, narrowing the number of places the player could stand on. In addition, the glowing tops of the platforms would light on fire when the dragon performed a special attack under the ring structure. The final battle with Emperor Meningitis originally had the player destroy color-coded tubes using the correct color of bomb. Plus, the tubes would rotate to keep gamers on their toes. In the second half of the fight, the floor caves in, leading to an aerial battle. These fights were scaled back because of playtesting, time, and money. I remember the combat designer wanted to go the Zelda route where each new weapon would be used on the boss, and a mission leading up to the boss fight would help the player familiarize themselves with said weapon. Sadly, that never happened. This only scrapes the tip of the iceberg. Other things cut include the following. About 15 to 20 minutes worth of cinematics were removed. Several story and side missions were cut or drastically altered. Crypto was going to explore more locations. In an earlier draft of the story, the villain was a rogue Furon posing as the leader of the Lunarian cult seen in the Hollywood level. A downloadable demo was planned, but scrapped.
You know, we've seen all your movies, Mr. Tripleson, and last night was...
Double the pleasure, double the fun. Call me Jack, ladies. You earned it. Now Amscray, it's time for my primal scream therapy.
Writing duties were handled by Jay Linder and Micah Wright, the same duo who wrote Big Willy Unleashed. The two were more involved with this game's development than Big Willy, and they had some influence on certain decisions, like the level order. However, not everyone was on board with their brand of humor. Their writing style pulled no punches, so when it came to the Hong Kong and Paris levels, a lot of the humor involved stereotypes. Plus, we were hiring white actors to do Asian voices, which didn't help matters. I always felt some of the 70s references were a little esoteric, and we didn't know when it was supposed to be funny, as there were only a couple of people laughing when the team would watch cutscenes in meetings and the jokes' references had to be explained. No one liked it. It aimed low and came in lower. It was cringy back then and is worse today. I think the basic storyline and everything isn't bad, but the dialogue and humor was so juvenile and unashamed, it's too bad we didn't have better material to work with. Reflecting on the game, Jay Linder said, "I think we probably didn't write them with the economy we use now. They were a little talky, but we had a blast. The punning was non-stop. It was great fun." John Knowles ran the production, and he was one of the few game guys we worked with who was genuinely interested in how we could help him make his game better. Unfortunately, both productions were troubled, beset, as I recall, by constantly slashed budgets and schedules. Neither game was released with anything like the polish they had planned or hoped for. We were savaged by the gaming press, such as it was back then. In my opinion, the original Destroy All Humans was a soft playing experience that skated by on novelty and charm. The sequels need to bound over that low bar to make a mark, and we didn't even match the original. We were all very disappointed.
Hee-haw! I'm so happy I'm both a pickin' and a grinning. What'd you do?
I was in such a rush that I'm afraid the saucer is not quite fully operational.
All I wanna know is, can I blow things up?
Destroy All Humans Path of the Furon was intended to release in September 2008. Trouble struck the studio when THQ announced layoffs and closures across the board. Sadly, Sandblast was caught in the crossfire. A large portion of the staff, including the creative director and other key personnel, were let go. This meant Path of the Furon was delayed from its planned September release to December. To ensure the game reached some state of completion, much of its work was gutted to meet the bare minimum. There was only about 3 or 4 people left to ship in the last couple of months after we got laid off, so some brutal things were done to reach the finish line. The game was never properly finished since most of the studio got laid off in the summer of 2008, with only a small crew of designers, programmers, and producers left to get it out the door. Not long after I left, I saw a video, watched it, and was shocked to see stuff like Ragdoll was missing. We spent a lot of time on Ragdoll since things like Crypto's mental powers and weapons needed to make an impact, but now humans just flailed around or T-posed when they were thrown or electrocuted. In 2016, Volition livestreamed Path of the Furon. During the stream, Rob Gable, a QA tester on the game, said a handful of Volition staff were flown to Seattle to help get the game done.
It's a very unique situation for this game.
Yeah, I've never heard that happening before with a game.
No, it's interesting. It's part of the identity of our industry. Is the stories behind the games aren't shared all that often.
Yeah,
just not enough, unfortunately, because then sometimes people feel like they're struggling through these challenges alone when really lots of other teams have been through them before.
Right.
So you don't hear about this stuff, and usually when something really doesn't work out, you don't get the backstory too much. But yeah, really just interesting situation. Very challenging for everybody involved.
Yeah.
While they managed to get the Xbox 360 version ready to go, the PS3 version was another story.
time is nearly at hand. A great wrong will be righted, an ancient prophecy fulfilled, and a hero of legend will arise.
Destroy All Humans: Path of the Furon was intended for both the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. When it came out in December, only the Xbox 360 version released. A few months later, the PlayStation 3 version released in Europe and Australia. The official reason why the PS3 version was canned in North America was due to development issues. Several devs I interviewed said the 360 version was their focus, while the PS3 version was an afterthought because of the system's constraints. This was just a port to reach the PS3 platform, and if anything had less than the Xbox version since we had to trim the fat even more to get it to work. If I remember correctly, there was less memory to work with, which was already low on the Xbox. During the live stream, Rob Gable explained the 360 version passed certification in North America, but the PS3 version didn't. The reason it's still released overseas is because Europe and Australia have different standards when it comes to certifying games. I tracked down a copy of the PS3 version for the purpose of this video. After playing it, the only word I can come up with is bizarre. For better and for worse, it's the same game, but dig a little deeper and you'll notice several differences. The graphics on PS3 look like someone smeared Vaseline, and the frame rate is even less stable. The audio is noticeably grainy. Voice acting and sound effects are crisp and clear, but the music sounds tinny and compressed. What's most surprising about the PS3 version is there's ragdoll. Well, most of the time. People ragdoll when you throw them or if they die. It's very unpolished, mind you. When bodies flail, it looks unnatural. It looks like they suddenly lost all the bones in their bodies. Another surprise is when the saucer, civilians walk around. Sort of. When you're flying, they're little black dots skating around, but when you start causing chaos, they'll run around, cower, etc. The PS3 port has an exclusive multiplayer mode called Gladiator. In Gladiator, one person plays as Crypto, the other is the Saucer. On foot, you need to find and activate safe houses while avoiding the Saucer, who's trying to kill Crypto. Crypto only has his Zap-O-Matic, but you can use EMP bombs to temporarily disable the Saucer. What makes Path of the Furon on PS3 bizarre is the fact it features these little things the 360 version lacks. As it turns out, there's a reason why. During the studio credits, there's a logo for Calyx Studios. I didn't know what work they did on the game until I did some digging and found out they handled porting the game to the PS3. Is the PS3 version worth tracking down? No. It's a janky, unfinished port of a janky, unfinished game. The extra multiplayer mode and little touches like ragdoll are interesting, but not enough to warrant going out of the way for.
Crypto is in the business of cruelty to humans, and we make sure that we give the player every tool he needs to play out that role.
We want players to feel like they're at the center of a science fiction action film, that they control the ultimate Destroy All Humans experience.
Destroy All Humans: Path of the Furon released on December 1st, 2008 to a critical thrashing.
Holy hookers of Ark Voodoo!
Critics slammed the game for its weak graphics, rampant glitches, and juvenile humor. While fan reactions were more forgiving, it wasn't enough to save the game. Personally, I think Path of the Furon has a lot of great ideas, but its execution is so spotty, it's hard to ignore. I love the streamlined controls and how easy it is to use weapons and abilities simultaneously. I like the new weapons, especially the Seeker drones and the Black Hole gun, and I like how they revamped the old guns, like turning the ion detonator into a sticky bomb and making the anal probe more combat effective. However, you can tell this game was the victim of a team not having enough time and money to finish things proper. The graphics range from passable to ugly, and the rampant glitches rival most Bethesda games. Dialogue and cinematics end abruptly, there's constant pop-in, and it's easy to get stuck in the ground. It feels like a game gutted at the last minute just so it was done. When you compare the final game to pre-release screenshots and footage, there's a noticeable contrast in quality. Everything looks nicer and cleaner, there's a ton of visual details absent in the main game, and the whole thing looks more polished. The clearest indicator the game was rushed out can be seen during the opening FMV. When Crypto lands, he hangs his arm on something. That something is supposed to be the game's logo, but for whatever reason, it's gone. As I mentioned, the gameplay is brimming with potential, but everything feels paint by numbers. The missions are occasionally fun, but it's mostly routine stuff. I also wish the game made better use of the temporal fist mechanic. It's a cool concept, but it's only used for dicking around, and that's it. Towards the end, there are some basic puzzles, but I wish more thought had been put into the mechanic. The humor isn't as clever as it was in the Pandemic titles.
Either I put on my underwear wet, or I just snorted 6 lines of baby laxative.
What the fuck?!
It relies heavily on obvious spoofs and stereotypes that are at times borderline racist. The Shenlong level is painful to sit through. When your ears aren't being grazed by painful Asian impressions, you're listening to uncomfortable running jokes where characters mispronounce names. However, if you ever want to hear Nathan Drake do Chinese voices, play this game.
You're surrounded. Surrender! Our kung fu is very strong. We have the flying sieves.
Now, I'll always have a soft spot for Path of the Furon. When I was 15, I wanted an Xbox 360 for Christmas solely because of this game. This was 2011, the same year that brought us Batman Arkham City, Saints Row the Third, Gears of War 3, and much more. I didn't want to play any of those, I wanted to play the janky Alien game. When I got it, I played the hell out of it, but as I've gotten older, I'm not afraid to admit the game has problems great and small. Big Willy Unleashed and Path of the Furon were the result of a publisher trying to milk a franchise while it's hot. Had THQ prioritized making one good game instead of rushing out 2 games, things might have turned out differently.
And that is one of the good things about having a body.
Now what? The casino is gone. The master was a fraud, and I'm out of a job.
As for Sandblast, the people who worked at the studio have gone on to better things. John Knowles ended up at Turn 10 Studios, where he has worked as a creative lead on every Forza game for the last 10 years. Chris Owe now works at Microsoft. In reflecting on the game, John Knowles said the project was more difficult than anticipated, adding the scope was too big for the time and resources they had. Out of all the games he's worked on in his 30+ year career, it's the only one he describes as a bona fide flip-flop. Reflecting on the game, Chris Owe said, "I had a blast working on the game and working with the people in the studio. It was one of the most fun jobs I've had. It was not without its challenges though. The game would have been amazing if we were able to execute the vision we had. As it stands, it's kind of embarrassing, though I think the sandbox gameplay is quite good. I'm very proud of that. I learned a lot from working on this game. For example, the challenges of platform constraints and trying to stay within budget on console hardware. I also learned a lot about how important it is to be efficient, focused, and avoid wasting effort on things, so you can ultimately achieve more. We changed our studio name to reboot everything, but in hindsight, I think that was a dumb idea and didn't do anything except make us more obscure. I also learned how important it is to work with flexible people who are easy to work with. Bad apples spoil the bunch. Having well thought out designs instead of endlessly iterating without focus was also an important lesson. I'm still super proud of the gameplay in the game, I just wish the rest of the game could have delivered as well.
Forget the casino, forget enlightenment. I'm gonna get back to doing what really counts, kicking ass and taking brains. So when are we going back to Earth?
Not we, Crypto. You.
Well, then I guess this is sayonara.
It's been good working with you, Crypto.
You too, Your Majesty. See ya in 10 years, Pox. See ya in 10 years. See ya in 10 years, Pox. You'll like the future. I got a feeling big hair's gonna be in style again.
Destroy All Humans, Path of the Furon's critical thrashing and weak sales put the franchise on ice. What you might not know is there was loose talk of a fourth game. Several years ago, Matt Cox, a game designer whose first job was working on Path of the Furon, held a Reddit AMA. During the AMA, someone asked him about Destroy All Humans and if he could bring it back. While he said he couldn't, he mentioned he wrote a pitch document for Destroy All Humans 4. It was set in the 80s and would have lampooned video games and 80s culture. This was corroborated by Brian Lee, who remembers, there were definitely talks about it, and the concept team was really excited because we were playing with the idea that would take place in the 80s. There was so much to work with. We also discussed having the style be completely cartoony, since Path of the Furon was in the middle with cartoony and real. In June 2022, an anonymous poster on 4chan shared details about the Unmade fourth game. It would have been called Destroy All Humans 4 Back to the Furon and featured Crypto140, who rocks a goatee. Gameplay-wise, it was going to harken back to the original's mixture of linear missions set in a sandbox environment. Crypto's arsenal would include new weapons like the Dung Flinger, which would launch woolly mammoth crap. This information comes from a 4chan post, so take it with a grain of salt. The writer says aside from some discussions and concept drawings, nothing concrete was created. Sandblast was shut down, and the series went under. In the years following Path of the Furon's release, THQ ran into financial troubles caused by the global recession and bad business decisions. In 2013, the studio filed for bankruptcy. All its assets and surviving studios were sold off to other companies. Saints Row, its developer Volition, and the Homefront franchise were acquired by Deep Silver. South Park: The Stick of Truth ended up at Ubisoft. The rest of THQ's library, including Red Faction, Darksiders, and Destroy All Humans, was acquired by the Vienna-based Nordic Games. In 2016, the publisher rebranded themselves as THQ Nordic. In an interview with GamesIndustry.biz, Reinhard Bolus elaborated on the company's renaming, explaining, "In the end, THQ was known for failure, but it was also known for some great gaming experiences. That's why we thought it was a popular brand that we should leverage. We're already more well known now than Nordic Games was. Nordic Games was a bit of a generic name. In the US, it put us on the radar for a lot of people. They knew the THQ brand, they knew the IPs, and at first there was still some confusion around it, but we're a new company, so that was part of the intention behind calling it THQ Nordic rather than THQ." In the same interview, he mentioned the publisher was trying to figure out what to do with the stockade of IPs it had acquired and how they would fit in the current gaming landscape. One of the games he cited was Destroy All Humans. The same year they renamed themselves THQ Nordic, the first two Destroy All Humans were re-released for PlayStation 4. This was done to test the waters and see how people would react to seeing the beloved franchise on modern consoles. Behind the scenes, THQ was figuring out how to resurrect the franchise. At one point, they considered a sequel and reached out to Micah Wright and Jay Lender about writing it. According to Jay, the pair did some brainstorming, but THQ Nordic opted to go a different direction. I think it would be interesting to find out what a crypto story could be in a more enlightened time. How could we make fun of political correctness without disrespecting the very good and necessary ideas behind it? How does crypto, a dyed-in-the-wool misogynist and serial anal probist, function in a world that, quite rightly, doesn't think it's funny anymore? THQ Nordic approached us a little while back about making a sequel, and when we told we'd love to take a crack at it, they said they wanted to go in another direction. Maybe they thought we weren't the right guys for the job, or maybe they think they can tell the same jokes we did a generation ago. Only time will tell. THQ Nordic chose to remake the original, figuring it would be a safer way to reintroduce the franchise. The question was, who would remake it? Black Forest Games was founded in 2012. The German-based developer cut its teeth on Giana Sisters games and Bubsy sequels before they were tasked with remaking the original Destroy All Humans. The team knew how beloved the original was and the challenges of attempting to remake the game while preserving what players know and love. Our vision was to remake the game in the way players remembered it, overlooking some of the technical limitations the original game developers had been facing. To achieve this, the game is now a one-to-one recreation as we modernize the gameplay and comfort features to what players expect today. Gameplay evolved a lot during the past 15 years since the original Destroy All Humans was released. Our approach was to first play the games, the whole series, and then look closely at the mechanics of the original game and how they compare to the sequels. Where Pandemic improved on certain controls or mechanics, we kept those to stay as close as possible to the series. Black Forest Games took elements from all the games and incorporated them into the remake. This included streamlining Crypto's movement and being able to use weapons and abilities simultaneously. Additionally, the team found ways to make his weapons more combat effective, and in the case of mobility, they added a new traversal option in the form of skate. Development on Destroy All Humans began in 2018. In early 2019, THQ Nordic made the bright decision to hold an AMA on the controversial forum site 8chan. While the company tried putting out the fires they started, keen-eyed viewers noted a list of games to be shown at E3 2019. On the list, Destroy All Humans. Fast forward a few months later to E3, where the big publishers are making their announcements. THQ Nordic revealed 3 new games at the event. First, SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. Next, Darksiders Genesis. And last but not least, it was official. Destroy All Humans was back and ready to probe. Following the reveal, Black Forest Games showed off the first gameplay. The game made its second public appearance at Gamescom, where the company talked more about the game and showed off a handful of stills comparing the remake and the original.
So we tried to remake it the way that you remember that it was, instead of how it actually did play.
In addition to playing the originals to figure out what worked and what didn't, the team had access to archives of Destroy All Humans material, including design documents, audio files, assets, and more. Plus, they consulted with people who worked on the first game, including key members like Dan Teasdale and Tom Abernathy.
Oh, great! The human military-industrial complex! We can't allow them to alert their leaders to our presence! Exterminate them! Now!
Open fire!
Instead of re-recording the dialogue, Black Forest Games opted to use the original audio recordings. According to Hasig, this was done for preservation purposes. It was the thing players remembered the most, so why bother messing with it? However, some new dialogue was recorded by Pox and Crypto's original actors.
Take a spin in your saucer, Crypto. Get a feel for the controls and then go ahead and start shooting!
During development, the team discovered unused audio files and blueprints for a scrapped mission. Therefore, they decided to resurrect this cut mission for the remake. We found a lot of unused audio files and designs from a shelved mission. This kickstarted our creative juices and inspired us to restore this mission in Area 42 that did not make it into the original game. In a way, it is our homage to the original development team. We know well the myriad circumstances of game development resulting in something getting cut, so we took to this brilliant opportunity to uncut that.
Crypto here. How's the view from the safety of the mothership?
Let's just say I'm glad I'm up here and you're down there. Loathsome little planet.
The Destroy All Humans remake released on July 28, 2020, 15 years after the original's release. Drix praised Black Forest's efforts to resurrect the original, but felt the game showed its age in certain areas, namely its mission design. On the other hand, fan reactions were overwhelmingly positive. During a financial briefing by Embracer, the owners of THQ Nordic, they mentioned the Destroy All Humans remake exceeded the company's expectations with regards to sales and community reactions. As of May 2021, the game has sold over 1 million units, and if you ask me, it was rightfully earned. The Destroy All Humans remake did a fantastic job updating the original while preserving what worked best, namely its humor and writing. I love the quality of life enhancements they added. While it retains the original's mixture of linear and sandbox design, missions flow smoother, and combat feels better thanks to the inclusion of character upgrades for Crypto and the Saucer. Not every change was great. The Anal Probe and Extraction ability are overpowered. I'm glad the Anal Probe is more combat effective like it was in Path of the Furon, but the upgrades make it a bit too powerful. The same applies to Extraction, which can be upgraded to chain to multiple targets. On the flip side, I like how PK is more combat effective. It may lack the weight and momentum of the original's PK, but it's easier to pick up and toss items. Destroy All Humans is a case example of how to do a remake. It honors the original but updates it for modern audiences. The developers understand what makes Destroy All Humans special, but unlike Sandblast, they have proper time and resources to execute their vision. Given the surprise success of the remake, it seems certain a remake of Destroy All Humans 2 was in the cards. It's the one thing people were always asking about even during the first remake's development, and it wouldn't be long till we found out what was next. In early 2021, THQ Nordic released a short trailer announcing the Destroy All Humans remake was on sale. At the end, this happened.
Are you done yet, 137? Wait your turn, little tadpole. I'm only getting started.
The Soliloquies quietly confirmed a Destroy All Humans 2 remake was in development, but they weren't quite done with the first game. In the summer of 2021, the Destroy All Humans remake was released on the Nintendo Switch, making this the second time the series made its appearance on Nintendo console. It's a solid port, despite some visual and technical hiccups. Plus, it feels surreal knowing there's a Destroy All Humans game you can play at home or on the go. In late 2021, Sony accidentally uploaded the gameplay trailer for the Destroy All Humans 2 remake, but it was quickly taken down. On the day of THQ Nordic's press conference, Destroy All Humans 2 Reprobed was officially announced for the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, plus the PC. In an interview with The Escapist, creative director Stefan Schmitz elaborated on the decision to make Reprobed exclusive to next-gen systems. That was a very hard choice to make for everyone. Either we would have to ship the new game with potentially weaker visuals compared to the first remake to accommodate the larger and denser maps of the second, or we would have to forego the old gen and gain back that optimization time and give that time back to the team to make a bigger, better world and combat experience. We decided to go with the latter choice as this allowed us to take a big step forward for Destroy All Humans 2 Reprobed in terms of visual quality. In the same interview, Schmitz explained the team kept the same philosophy they had with the first game's remake, which is preserve what made the game great while finding ways to update it for modern audiences. In May 2022, THQ Nordic announced Destroy All Humans 2 Reprobed would release on August 30th. Plus, a standalone multiplayer spin-off called Clone Carnage was released. Judging by what's been shown of Reprobed, Black Forest Games is taking the work they did on the first remake and cranking it up to 11, very much how Pandemic did the same many years ago. The reimagined characters and locations look excellent, and the gameplay appears to be even more fast and responsive than the first remake. Taking a cue from Path of the Furon, the Saucer now mass abducts humans and in turn, uses them to upgrade mental abilities. The Dislocator is more combat efficient, capable of bouncing its targets around like a demented basketball. Suffice to say, August 30th can't come soon enough.
I think there is no doubt about it that we shall live on in infamy!
In the here's a word for you.
Yes.
Okay, word boy.
Yes.
In the annals of game history,
Yes,
do you think we're gonna be famous from this game?
This has been the complete history of Destroy All Humans. I want to give a huge thanks to Gaudier Roux, the man behind the Twitter account Destroy All Humans Fan Tribute. He was incredibly helpful as he provided me with all the artwork, beta images, and more seen in this documentary. Special thanks to those who agreed to be interviewed for this project, and special thanks to the fans for supporting me as I worked on the project. Also, a huge thanks to THQ Nordic and Black Forest Games for giving the franchise a second chance. I can't wait to see what the future holds for crypto.
And so, the world breathes a sigh of relief. The threat of alien invasion proved a false alarm. As for those who scan the skies for a real visit from outer space, they may be in for a very long wait. Perhaps the lesson is that we should turn our gaze inward, remembering that man's worst enemy is often himself.